Good afternoon and welcome to today's broadcast. My name is Laura Madsen. I am the Business Intelligence Evangelist and Healthcare Services Lead for Lancet Software. And thank you for joining us today on a Friday afternoon for the first in a series of Healthcare BI Success webinars. And today we are going to talk about the 5 steps to ensuring data quality. Just a couple of housekeeping items here. As you are looking at your screen, you likely see something on the right-hand side, and at the bottom of that you can enter questions. And at the end of this webinar, I will be answering those questions. So if you have any questions for me about the content we're addressing today, feel free to enter it into that little window there on the bottom, and I'll be happy to answer those as we get through the content. So today, our first step in healthcare business intelligence success is data quality. And this is a key tenet of successful healthcare BI, in my opinion. And obviously, it's a key tenet in success of any business intelligence program. But I do think that it plays a much more important role for healthcare business intelligence because inaccurate data or what is perceived to be inaccurate data can really not only impact user adoption from a business intelligence program perspective, but also has the potential of presenting information that just isn't accurate. And obviously the information that we present from a healthcare perspective is that's very important for us to be as accurate as possible. So that's why I find and talk about data quality in the context of a key tenet, and really the first tenet that I address from a successful healthcare BI program perspective. And what I have found through years of doing this work is that many companies have found themselves constituting what is considered good, quote unquote, good data quality, and what to do with that even once they have identified what good is. So that's the nature of this webinar. That's what we're going to really dig into today. So we're going to talk a little bit about data governance and talk a lot about data quality, but talk a lot about what good means, how to define that, what to do with that information once you get it, and how to actually get down right to the nuts and bolts of implementing good data quality into your program. So first of all, for those of you that have heard me talk before or maybe read the book Healthcare Business Intelligence, one of the things that I always talk about when I talk about data quality is the fact that there is no such thing as 100% data quality. And that can be a very provocative statement depending on who's in the room. I tend to see a lot of finance people sort of gasp when I say that statement. But I truly believe that is an accurate statement. And the reason why primarily is because most of the time data is created by a person. And when people create things, particularly data, particularly in an environment where they may be under pressure or in a hurry, there's a really high likelihood that data may be not as accurate as it could be. So first off, when we start talking about a data quality initiative, we all need to recognize that there is no such thing as 100% data quality. Now the next step from there is we have to aim for what is just good enough, right? And that varies for everybody, but talking about it in terms of just enough data quality is the way that you want to go. We all have to understand that there are cost implications to any data quality exercise, and that sort of statement is a lot of the heart of what we'll get to in our session today. But what I mean by that is any time that you end up having to analyze a data quality question costs your organization time and money. I have a really great example. A number of years ago, I was working with I was responsible for a BI product. And I had a client that had been at the implementation for almost 2 years, where in comparison, most of our implementations were somewhere around 6 to 9 months. So I asked the director of operations who was in charge of the implementations why that was, why they were taking so long, and had come to find out that they were doing a heavy-duty data quality assessment, which I applaud, but they were quite literally going cell by cell and making sure that every data point in their data warehouse was, in their minds, 100% or accurate. Of course, the challenge to that is as soon as they released their data warehouse and new data started pumping through there, that data was immediately no longer 100% accurate. And it took them nearly 3 years to get their data warehouse up and running, for what ended up being a few weeks of very tumultuous time as they recognized that 100% data quality that they achieved, that they had strived so hard to achieve, was degraded very, very quickly. So with that, understanding that we really have to talk about just enough data quality, and we have to understand that there are cost implications to any effort that you do here. The two things that I really feel like drive a lot of the data quality from a programmatic perspective in the exercises are data governance and stewardship. So we all recognize that we have to govern our data if we feel it's a corporate asset. And we need, in order to govern our data, to have stewards of that data, people that know that data very well, maybe understand the transactional systems, certainly have a very good understanding of how people should be using that data. And that is the key aspect of data governance is really around data stewardship. And then, of course, metadata, which is the record of truth, if you will, and that's sort of mucking up a couple of different references, but if we use our metadata, if we create our metadata, if we maintain our metadata, and apply our data quality standards in that metadata, that's a lot easier to manage it from there than trying to manage it from outside the system itself. So I think using metadata really helps make you safe. Makes it a little bit easier anyway. So when we talk about good data quality and how do we get there, one of the things that we talk about obviously is this data stewardship. And I'm not going to talk a ton about data steward programs. That's sort of another webinar. But I think what's important here is that we have to recognize that there are lots of different organization or committees within your organization and a lot of different people that have to be involved in not only the governance activity but also the data quality activity, because the governance is just the quality is just applying the governance rules, right? So at the bottom of this pyramid, we have the data stewards, which implies that we have a lot more stewards in our activities than, for the example, executive staff that sort of drive the policies and procedures associated with governance. In the middle of this pyramid, we have our data steward working group, where all the stewards get together and discuss the data and how it interacts with each other, which is an incredibly valuable committee to have. And then you have your steering committee, which manages more of the hands-on day-to-day aspects of the governance than the executive staff does. And obviously, any kind of issue goes all the way up to your executive staff or your senior leaders for escalation and approval as deemed appropriate. But this governance method, if you will, this data governance idea sort of wraps itself around the data quality. And data governance is what drives the definitions of the business and what is determined as to be good enough. So we really have to understand that you can't start a data quality exercise without having some kind of governance function up and running and rules being applied. So from a data governance perspective, how do we get that running? I mean, if you're really focused on data quality and that's something you really want to make sure you have really good data quality, but you maybe don't have a data governance function up and running, and you've avoided it because it has felt too bureaucratic, too large, and in a lot of ways there's a perspective that it's just another barrier to get through. And I've seen that, and I have the similar concerns from a data quality perspective. I'm a very big proponent of small data governance functions. They have to be highly agile and very dynamic. And I highly recommend that you adopt existing committees and ask them to just take on the data governance function within their existing agendas, rather than creating a net new organization that likely has the same or very similar folks than other committees that already exist in your organization. So one of the first things you have to do is identify the participants, and that's the data stewards and the committee representatives. You don't have to go much further than that to get started. And as a matter of fact, from a data steward perspective, you really just want to identify the stewards that are that represent the area that you use the most. So eligibility, benefits, patients, providers, whatever area that you really feel like you have to drill in on to better understand, that's the steward or stewards that you need to identify right away. One of the first things that I recommend doing is creating a policies and procedures. This feels very governy, if you will, but it really is just a document that helps you and your organization understand what governance is and how they function. Who has decision rights? Who has the right to decide what is good enough data quality, how things are defined? And that's an important aspect of governance, and particularly determining who has those decision rights. And if we don't sort of create, at a very minimum, a couple of pages of documentation to help explain that, I think we're at risk of people questioning the governance process. So take a few hours and create the standard policies and procedures document. I think it's very important to begin education around governance, what it is and why you're doing it. You don't need to go into big, grand, exercises around data governance and philosophy and theory and all of that. Just simply say, data is an asset in our organization, therefore we have to govern it. Here's how we're doing that. And I think that goes a long way in the beginning. As you move forward from a governance maturity perspective, how you talk to people about governance will have to change. But as you get started, just having a baseline conversation about what it is and why it's important is where you need to start. Then you need to determine the when, or the cadence of the things that you'll be doing from a governance perspective. And I think this is probably one of the most important things that governance organizations can do, because a lot of the critique of governance is that they create a lot of bureaucracy, but they don't create a lot of value. So I always recommend that you talk in terms of what are the 5 or 6 things that the governance council or group will address in the next 6 weeks. And I'm not talking big things here, right? I'm talking about the things we just talked about. I'm identifying the participants, creating the policies and procedures, creating documentation or training around what is governance and why it's valuable to the organization. Those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. But the important thing is you identify what they are, you communicate that out, and then when you're done, when you've achieved those things, when you've identified the participants, when you've created the policies and procedures, when you've started educating, you tell people that too. You tell them, we said we were going to do this and we did this. And then you keep communicating out about what you're doing from a governance perspective. And at some point, right, the communication is actually going to be about the data quality itself, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's important to create a plan to consistently communicate. Tell people what you're going to do, and when you did it, tell people what you did, and then tell them what you're going to do next. And that goes a long way to removing any kind of barriers or obstacles around people thinking that governance isn't helping or creating just more bureaucracy. So the title of this webinar is the steps for good data quality, and here are the 5 steps. So, and we'll drill into these in a lot more detail. But the first thing is we need to identify your project. There's just too many options, and you can't do the Big Bang theory of sort of trying to address every possible data point before you use data. That's just not going to happen. So I really like the approach of identifying a project and moving that project through this data governance, data quality timeline until you get to the end where the data is actually entered into the data warehouse in a certified data scenario. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the project that we're going to start with from a data governance and data quality initiative. We also have to recognize that each information domain can have a different quality range, and that seems like sort of a random thing right now, but if you think about the project that you identify as being a dashboard, and maybe this dashboard in the beginning is just an executive dashboard, right? You got a couple of key performance indicators or KPIs that your executives have been asking for. You probably provide it today in some kind of Excel sheet or a PowerPoint or something like that. But within those KPIs, you have information domains that touch a broad set of your organization. Maybe it touches finance, maybe it touches operations, maybe it touches clinical. In each of those cases, those information domains can and should have different quality ranges, and you'll see what I mean by quality range in a minute. One of the most important things that you can do as you're starting these conversations about what is good data quality is to discuss the level of accuracy or quote-unquote good data quality before a project begins. And this is so critically important because once data gets released and somebody questions something, you will instantly be set back on your heels. You're going to be in a reactive mode, and you're going to have to do what you have to do in order to assure people that your data is quote unquote accurate. So if you have that conversation before and you set some standards up before, those situations become less and less impactful to your organization over time. So if you determine and discuss the level of accuracy before the project, you also have to determine the steps in which you will assess the accurate results. So in other words, I want this data point to be accurate 92% of the time. How do you get to 92% of the time? What equates to 92% accurate? You need to know the who, what, when, and how, and we'll talk about that. And finally, it's the steps to data certification. And I like this idea. I've heard it over the years from other BI practitioners, this idea that any data that ends up in your data warehouse should be certified. And all that means is that it's certified in the context of these good data quality rules. We've applied these good data quality rules as we've predetermined, and the data that is in the data warehouse is under sort of files under that data certification perspective. So what that does is it really helps continue the communication that we have followed all of the guidelines as determined by the business. We have a standard definition. We have a standard way of defining good data quality, and we're going to advertise that within the data warehouse itself. So let's get into each of these a little bit. So the first thing is we have to identify the project. And as you all know, because you've probably been doing BI for a little while, or really just any project where the business has a lot of pent-up demand, the first time you ask somebody what this project could be or should be, the answer is probably going to be just like, yeah, absolutely, give me it all, right? And of course, we have all heard the term boiling the ocean. So, what happens when your project becomes the boil the ocean project? Any advice? Well, the best advice is you do it one cup at a time, or of course, eating the elephant one bite at a time. But the important message here is incremental, right? Do it in small chunks. Do it in achievable chunks, because what you don't want to do is bite off so much that you just don't have a realistic ability to ensure that any data point that gets into the data warehouse is certified. That's what you don't want to do, because then it immediately starts to degrade trust from your end user's perspective. So again, I talked a little bit about this idea of pick a dashboard, and pick a dashboard that a lot of people see, like an executive dashboard. That gets a lot of play across your organization. The executives get really excited about it when they start to see stuff like that. And while they're off looking at this great dashboard that you just released that has the certified data in it, then you go back to the drawing board and start with a new project, right? And you're continually moving forward, pushing things out to your business users. But in each scenario, in each sort of ecosystem of that project, you're applying all the good standards for your data quality, so that as things are released, new metrics are added into the data warehouse that are considered to be certified data. So determine the project and try to make that as concise and relatively small in the beginning as possible, so that you have a really good chance at success. So then the next thing is you have to really be able to manage expectations, because your first conversation out to your end users is going to be around this concept of good data. So what is good data to an end user? And managing expectations are going to be hard, and most of our business users are going to say to you, I want it all, I want it right now, and I want it cheap. And for some reason, when I was doing this slide, I just thought of people yelling, and Jillian Michaels popped into my head. I hope that your business doesn't get up in your face and start screaming at you to run faster on the treadmill, i.e. the data warehouse version of that is I want it all, I want it right now, and I want it for cheap. But the important thing is we have to start opening up a conversation with our business users on terms that they can understand about what it means to really have good data quality. And that can be a pretty tough conversation, because in most cases business folks are just going to just be like, you know what, I just want good data quality, and I don't know what that looks or feels like, and I don't understand why I can't have 100% all the time. And those conversations are tough to have, and I'm sure many of you have tried to have those in the past, and maybe to varying degrees of success. I know for myself, a number of years ago, I was involved in a contracting negotiation with a pharmacy benefit management company that I worked for. We provided reports out to our clients, which were health plans. And the sales guy comes up to me and hands me the contract and says, "Oh, here, read the section on reporting and make sure you're okay with it." And I read the section on reporting, and in that section, it clearly stated that the company that I worked for had guaranteed 100% data quality. And my heart started to race, and I got really red in the face. And I thought to myself, well, thank goodness he let me review it before anybody signed it. And then I flipped to the last page and noticed that it was a fully executed document. So we had agreed to, the sales guy had agreed to 100% data quality. And that was a really tough thing to swallow from my perspective, because as we've talked about, right, there's no such thing as 100% data quality, and it was really around managing expectations from that point forward. And the first person I started with was that sales guy, because it was important for him to understand that so that he didn't do it again next time. And so how do you have that conversation around around managing expectations and what good data quality is? Well, here's the end point. This is what we really need to get to. And forgive me, this isn't not real. This does not reflect anything as far as real numbers. But what I was trying to show was the level of information that we really need to get to in order to start applying data quality standards in the data itself, right? So our project, as you can note here, is our executive dashboard. And one of the first things we're going to report on this is a per member per month metric. And so our range for this is between 100 and 200, and we get this data monthly, and our acceptance criteria is 90%, which means that 90% of that data should fall but within a 100 to 200 range. And because it's monthly, we do that on a monthly basis, and et cetera, et cetera. And the same falls for the number of prescriptions per member per month, and then the member count itself, which I specifically called out, that's measured on the 15th of each month. So this is the kind of thing that you want to get to, and you really quite literally want to document this in a table like this. Obviously, it's not going to be in PowerPoint, but it should be in Excel or in Word, in a document that people can look at, revise, and approve, and formally approve, maybe even physically have people sign off on it. Because you will be using this document to reach out to either your data stewards who will actually be doing the work, or your data quality analysts to help create a set of queries that ensure that the data falls within these appropriate ranges at the acceptance criteria level. So managing expectations, sitting down with your business people and trying to get to this level of information so that you can actually apply queries to the data, and having those conversations is one of the first things that you have to do. And you can certainly draw something like this as you get into the room with them. Draw something like this up on the whiteboard and list out all of your metrics that are your key performance indicators, and the metrics that drive them on the whiteboard, and have us start talking about them. And by the way, it may not be your business users, depending on your organization. Some of this may be the data stewards, and the business users just review and approve it. So how do we get those business users' idea wrapped around this idea that maybe it is only 90% accurate, or 92% accurate, or 95% accurate? And one of the things I like to do is I do a little process map, and this is a version of one that I've done in the past with a client. I cleaned it up and redrew it so that you didn't see any system names or anything like that. But one of the conversations that you have to have as you start talking about data quality to business folks is this idea that anytime data moves, or anytime data is touched by a person, you introduce the opportunity for error. So therefore, you cannot have 100%. So that goes back to the I want it all, I want it right now, and I want it cheap conversation, which will be the first response that most business people will give you. And you'll say, okay, great, here's the table we have to fill out. I understand where you're coming from, but let's just take a few minutes and map out the process of how we know data gets to us today. Okay, and in this case, for this particular scenario, most of our data came from our EHR. And that's a pretty obvious scenario. And within the EHR itself, guess what? Most of that data is made by a human. We had in this situation, we had really good structures where we had as many radio buttons and drop-down buttons, so we had finite data in a lot of cases. But there were also a number of instances where people just had to type things in, like blood pressure and other kinds of things. So at the end of the day, it was still entered in by a human, and humans can still hit the wrong radio button or hit the wrong thing on the drop-down and not really realize it. From that EHR, that data went into a number of transactional systems, a number of different lab systems, pharmacy, the practice management or appointment system. It was going all over the place. And in one instance, when it moved, the transactional systems weren't pulling the data. We had to actually push the data. So there was another person that was touching that data. And then as it got out of the transactional systems, we actually had to push that data out to in a couple of different instances, right? We had to push it out to the report. So there was an ETL aspect in there. And then the report itself was actually just an Excel document that people touched and created themselves. So there you have one scenario where that report, by the time it got to the individual consuming that report, had been touched by a person 3 times and had been moved twice. Lots of possibility for error. And as you see, in each time, there's sort of different varying situations where it's touched by a person or moved. And every time that happens, you introduce the possibility for error. Anything can happen when you move data. Your load can be interrupted. Maybe you don't follow ETL best practices, and you don't have if a load is interrupted, you have to go all the way back to the beginning and just keep doing that. All kinds of things can happen. I remember a situation a number of years ago where my head ETL developer called me up, and this had been something we'd been doing for years, right? But we made a minor change because our load kept getting interrupted, our batch process kept getting interrupted because our data had grown so much and we ran out of our window. So we'd made a really minor change. But as in the course of making that minor change, a person, an individual, had inadvertently modified the code so that we were dropping anything that ended with 1. And anything that ended with 1. And I don't even know how that works, but that's a really good an example of a situation where we had been doing that for a long time, but we had to make a minor modification to the data transfer because our batch window ran out, and because somebody touched it, we messed something up. So as you're talking to your business people, and this is the first time you've had a conversation around data quality, and they keep telling you, I don't know what it looks and feels like, but I just want it all right now. These are the kinds of conversations that you need to help that you need to have with them to help them understand what you're talking about and why it's important to talk about data quality in terms of just good enough, and what is good enough that is required to get you to get everybody to accept the data. So I know that feels like, number one, that was a lot of information in 30 minutes, and number two, I remember sitting on that side, and it wasn't really that long ago, being a BI director, thinking, how in the world am I really legitimately going to do this? How am I going to only accept certified data into my warehouse? How am I going to ask business people, even the data stewards themselves, what good enough is? And how are we going to do that with such frequency that we do it for every metric that we report on? It felt really like a mission impossible, and if I could cue the music right now, I would for you. But I think just with anything, if you can break off the work into incremental parts, things that feel smaller and more achievable, we have a really good shot of getting that part done, right? So the first thing is as we've gone through this process with the business, and we've helped them understand that there's no such thing as 100% data quality, and we've managed expectations, and we've identified what our acceptance criteria is for some of these data metrics. The next thing is, how do we make sure that all those things that we went through with the business are actually applied in the data itself. And so now we have to figure out the who, what, when, and how. So the who can be a data steward. If your organization is fortunate enough to have data quality analysts, that's another very good resource to actually do this work. Whomever is doing it has to have some good analytic skills. So in other words, they have to be comfortable writing SQL queries. What you don't want to have is somebody that maybe isn't as strong in writing straight up queries, because we don't want to be using a query engine that could also introduce a possibility for error. So in other words, you don't want to be using your BI product to run some of these queries if you know that there's some logic embedded in your BI product. And if you know there's no logic, then use your BI product. But a lot of times, from a data quality perspective, you just want to query that data directly out of the warehouse so that you can reduce the number of instances where that data could have changed, so that you isolate changes. So whoever does this has to have that skill set of being able to write queries, whether that be in SAS or using SQL directly. So a data steward or a data quality analyst. And what they're measuring has to be these specific metrics as agreed by the committee. So you remember the table that we looked at before. We have to have a range, and in most cases that's what it will look like: a low and a high, or a minimum and a maximum. So it can't go below and it can't go above. And determining the frequency of how often the range falls within that. So it's 90% of the time it falls between the 100 and 200 range, if you will, just for a simple example. And then you have to determine when you're going to look at that data. And this is an important aspect, because if you think about the drawing that we just looked at, or even a standard sort of drawing of an enterprise data warehouse environment, you know that data moves in an EDW environment as well. So the spot that you want to check that data is after all the ETL has been done, but before it gets loaded into the data warehouse. So all the ETL that actually applies these business rules, so that you know that all the appropriate business rules have been applied. But before it's actually loaded into the data warehouse, because once it's loaded into the data warehouse, it's considered quote unquote certified, right? So that's the point that you want to be able to take a look at that data and make sure it's of good quality. And then the sort of the how is you really need to identify any specific methodologies that should be applied. And for the most part, this is going to be, your min, max, and your frequency to match your acceptance range. But if you're dealing with different kind of data or highly analytic scenarios, you may end up wanting to look at correlation coefficients or something like that. But if there are any special methodologies, you need to document them at this point as well. So now this message has to self-destruct. So for those of you that remember the Mission Impossible of the day, not the Tom Cruise version, I digress. So let's just pretend that everything went wonderful. And we have an executive dashboard that we've identified as our project. We identified all the metrics and the acceptance criteria for the standards for that. And we applied all those via data quality analyst. And we found that all of our data matched that acceptance range, and everything is wonderful. The next thing is you got to put it into the data warehouse. And I keep talking about this idea of a certified data. And I think this is a wonderful, wonderful way to advertise, if you think about it like this, advertise that you have applied the data quality standards that your organization has agreed to. So what that means is that any data that ends up in your data warehouse post a certain point is certified data, which means it's accurate based on your quality standards, right? So the reason I say past a certain point is that, most of us today in 2013 probably have an enterprise data warehouse already up and running. And you may even say to me, for the most part, you think the data is pretty good in there. But when we start applying these rules, we want people to know that we've actually applied these things, even if we feel like we have good, solid data quality in our existing EDW. So it's just a matter of sort of closing the communication gap, if you will, or the loop around, you said it was this and it is this, and we've certified that through this through this agreed upon process. So anything that gets loaded into your data warehouse past the point that your data governance or data quality program started will be certified. And you'll incrementally do that, right? So each project that you do, like this executive dashboard, but maybe the next one is an operations dashboard, and then you do a financial dashboard, and then et cetera, et cetera. Each time you do a new project, any new metric that gets put into the data warehouse has to have all of these new standards applied to it, and then that gets certified. And you just keep doing that until you get to the point where, most of your data warehouse has certified data in it. And again, it's mainly an advertising thing. It's mainly letting people know that you followed the standards that they have requested you to follow. And this is really important from an adoption perspective, right? So how do you do that? Here's a dashboard. It's a meaningful use dashboard. This is just for sort of sharing with you that this is how you do that. In the corner, in this case, we put it on the very bottom, sort of EDW certified. And I've actually seen them where they have a little logo, like a green check, and that's all it is. There's nothing else. There's no other information. But everybody that works at that organization knows that if there's that little green check at the bottom of the report, that all the data that's in that report has actually been data quality tested based on those standards. And you put something on each report, at the bottom of each report, that shows that. And I've also seen instances where they put a date there, which is a very good exercise as well. But the important thing is you're closing the loop, because otherwise you're doing all this stuff, you're interacting with the business, you're asking them the questions, and then from their perspective it just goes away, right? They don't see the rest of it. And this is that last piece that I think some of us miss as we're doing these exercises and these data quality efforts. So here's another way to advertise. You do a report. You do your own data quality report. And I've actually worked with data governance groups that have created their own data quality or data steward dashboard, where they report this kind of a thing in a dashboard out to a group of people. But essentially, it takes the same table that we talked about earlier, these sort of very generic examples, and it shows you the actual results, and then it gives you a little green dot. And I suppose if some of them didn't meet the criteria, it would be yellow or red. And in those cases, you have to sort of go back and find out what's happening in the data and why it is so far off, and analyze that situation and try to fix that data as close to the source as possible. But the important thing here is that you've asked the business, you've documented their data quality standards, you have identified any special method or how you apply that in the data quality itself, or the data quality checks itself. And then once you get things into the data warehouse, you create that last feedback loop, which is you put this little EDW certified or data certified or some kind of thing on the reports themselves, and then you create this data quality report that goes out to at a minimum the audience that is receiving the dashboard, so that they know that this is that all that data is accurate based on those standards that they've identified. So again, you may be asking yourselves, geez, that's a lot of steps. And just the idea of analyzing a lot of this could take a lot of time, right? And there's no question about that. These efforts are time consuming, but they're very worth it. The great news for all of us, of course, is that there are products out there that exist that are meant and built just from a data quality perspective. This is all they do, and you can put all kinds of rules into them, and they can pump out the results of these kinds of things for you, so that you don't have some poor data quality analyst just chucking away at this all day long. You still need to have a data quality analyst, but maybe they can take a vacation every few months or something like that. So just know that all of this doesn't have to be as hard as it sounds, and there are actually tools or products out there that can support your data quality efforts. And I do recommend that as you grow, that you consider looking into those products, because in the beginning it may feel manageable to deal with this through products like Excel, but as you grow and it gets more and more complicated and there are more rules to apply, it will quickly feel very overwhelming. And automating those checks just continues to assure that you have very high standards for data quality. So that's the 5 steps of data quality. And again, just going to go through them for a quick refresher. Identify your project. Understand and know that each information domain can and should have a different quality range. Discuss the level of accuracy before you start your project, before any project begins. Determine the steps in which you will assess accurate results. So now that you know what accurate is, how are you going to determine if things are accurate? And then making sure that you get your data into your certified data into your warehouse, and you advertise that piece, whether it be on the bottom of a report or a data quality report or dashboard in and of itself. So thank you for attending today's webinar. I think we definitely have some time for questions. If you have any, go ahead and type them into the question pane. All right, we got one question about sort of governance and the policies and procedures, and how do you get that started, and what do I recommend for baseline policies and procedures? And I think that's a good question. I think every organization's a little bit different on how comfortable they feel from a policies and procedures standpoint. Again, at a minimum, I would identify who are the participants. So the data stewards themselves, and then any committee participants that you may have. And I would also include a decision matrix, if you will, or sort of who's responsible for what. The other thing that I will often include is sort of a standard for committee participation. And why that's important is if you are making decisions about data quality standards in those committees, which sometimes happen because that's where all your business users are, you want to make sure that it's clear that participation is required, or you have to send an appropriate delegate. Otherwise, if you make a decision about a particular data or particular metric and somebody's missing, and then they come back afterwards and say, I don't agree with that, you're sort of, your project can sort of be put on hold in the interim while you get that person sort of back up to speed. And you don't want to have to do that. So a great way to do that, to prevent that in the beginning, is to say, these are the participants, this is how we're going to work together, these are the people that have the decision rights. And if you cannot attend a meeting, you have to send a delegate, or the alternative, of course, is sending the agenda out ahead of time and letting people respond to that agenda so that they can get their vote in. All right. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the questions. There were a couple others. I will be answering those directly through email, and just know that you can reach me there's a contact slide, so you can reach me anytime at the email there. You can follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I tweet about my son or the weather, which in Minnesota is often newsworthy, and my phone number as well. So thank you for your time today, and we'll see you next month.